it's great to have Ryan Knutson, who's the co-host of The Journal, which is the Wall Street Journal and Gimlet podcasts. Prior to that, he was Senior Vice President of Media Partnerships for Dow Jones. He also was an associate producer at Frontline at one point in his career as well. Welcome, Ryan, who's also an SOJC alum. Thanks, Ryan.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, so tell us, first of all, we got to explain where you are and why you're there.
Yeah.
The background is...
Yes. Well, yeah. So, we started working from home March 13th, I think, March 12th. And so, the weekend before that, we're like, oh, we might have to start working from home. What is that going to look like? We took home some recording equipment, and then, but now it's, I've got like my whole, I just use like the Zoom thing here. But so Kate, my co-host, she's at her house in Brooklyn. She's got a little kind of a makeshift place set up in her basement. And then the whole team is at their homes. And we've had to kind of build a whole new file management structure, workflow changes. But we interview reporters and outside guests just either over the phone, or we connect to them over Zoom, and then they record themselves using voice memos just like this as they sit there. So we get a good audio quality, and it's worked out pretty well so far, surprisingly. It's a bit cumbersome, but we're pretty well, we've figured out how to function on it. So we're going to keep producing the podcast through probably at least the end of the year, working from home.
And for people who may not realize it, the great thing about being in a closet with a lot of clothes is it absorbs,
Yeah. So this is my little office here. We live in a studio in Brooklyn, but we happen to have like this large little utility room. There's a washer and dryer just to my left, and like it's our HVAC and our water heater and all this stuff. But also we have my wife hangs up her clothes in here too, so it works out pretty well.
All right,
she's downstairs, working. All
right. Well, let's start by just talking about what your transition was from the SOJC into your career. What was the break, or how did you make that transition?
Yeah, well, so I graduated in 2009, which was also the depths of a terrible recession at that point. And I had applied to pretty much every internship that I possibly could. And I got an internship at the Wall Street Journal and the San Francisco Bureau over the summer. And that was sort of helped by the fact that Jim Pinciero was a SOJC alum, and he was the Wall Street Journal managing editor, and he's on the journalism school's advisory council. And I met him at some point at a journalism event when he was around, and I talked to him afterward, and he was like, are you going to apply for our internship? And I was like, of course. And he's like, well, let me just, put in a good word for you or whatever. And so I think that connection sort of helped. So I went to San Francisco and interned there. And like I said, I was applying for every internship that I could. And I got OPB offered an internship to me as well, right as I was beginning the WSJ internship. And I was like, well, great. I'll go there after my Wall Street Journal internship is over. And then partway through the summer, I heard back from the ProPublica internship that I had applied to, and I said, great, I'll go to New York after I'm finished with the OPB internship. So like by the middle of the summer, I had 2 more internships lined up after my first internship. And I think like there was some benefit of the recession, meaning that no places were hiring, because it meant that my perspective was like, oh, I'm going to just keep applying for internships then. I didn't sort of like, I sort of thought that a job might be a little bit unrealistic. And there's sort of this window right after you graduate where everybody will take internship applications. You don't have to, there comes a point after a year or two that you're sort of too far removed from graduating in order to apply for internships. And so I use that, I think, to some degree to my advantage, and then did those internships. And then when I was at ProPublica, I started writing about the spill in the Gulf of Mexico. So right at the very end of my internship, which was supposed to end, my internship was about to be over, and it was like, thanks. And I was getting ready to go back home and move in with my parents in Eugene or in Beaverton. And then the spill happened. I started writing about the spill, and then PBS Frontline wanted to do a partnership with ProPublica on the spill because there was other reporters who were working on there too. And then they had an opening for an associate producer job. And so I applied for that and got it. And then that's kind of what kept me in New York. But I loved working for Frontline. Documentaries are great, but it's a big effort to get to do a documentary. It's a huge bureaucratic kind of thing to get an idea off the ground. And I really wanted to be a reporter. I wanted to have a beat. I wanted to do my own stories. And so I kept in touch with editors at the Wall Street Journal, and then a job came open to cover telecom, and I had done a project when I was at ProPublica about telecom, and so then that's how I got a job at the Journal covering telecom, and that's how I really sort of landed as a reporter in New York in the first part of my career.
Mm-hmm. I always like to ask about just the whole matter of self-confidence, because walking up to a Wall Street Journal executive, even though he's an alum, is intimidating for most people. How have you cultivated your own sense of confidence as your career has moved forward?
Well, I think it's really all been about like the work. Like when you feel like you've like spend 90% of your time trying to make good stories that result in good clips. And then all you need is to get attention on those clips, But I think in terms of like going up and talking to somebody, I've always tried to sort of have a personal rule that if I'm ever any place where there's like panel speakers or anything like that, and there's somebody that I think I might have some benefit of having a connection to, I'll just try to think of a question to come up afterward and ask them. I mean, you can really do that for anybody, even for no reason. Like if somebody writes a story that you think is really great, just write them an email and be like, I'm really interested in how you did that story. I'm a kind of a fan of your work, and I'm a student, and I'd love to like learn more about that. And you can build a connection with anybody just by like having a question for them. So like that was kind of what I did, and that's what sort of helped me work out with Jim, I think. And then when I got to New York, I was still interested in working for the Wall Street Journal. I was interning at ProPublica when I first arrived, and I reached out to the hiring editor at the time, a woman named Kathy Panagoulias, and was like, hey, I just got to the city. Like, can I come by and have coffee and hear about if there's any openings at the Journal? I had an internship over the summer, and she said, sure. And then like introduced me to a few people, and people are like genuinely like pretty willing to help students, I think, if they show initiative.
Mm-hmm. What would be your advice for people who are coming into this particular recession, which they're saying, just because of COVID might be exceptional?
Yeah, I mean, it's tough. I think that like anytime the economy is bad, it's really hard. And especially it's hard now because like you can't go meet with people in person. But I also think that like there's going to be a lot of people that are probably going to resign themselves to the fact that this is a shitty situation. And so if you are able to take more initiative, then you might be able to get a leg up. And I think that people are like, Zoom, I think people are open to talking. And I think that and they're also, I know a lot of people in journalism are really sympathetic to what's going on right now. So I would imagine that like, if there's anybody that you want to get to know any place, you could just send them a message on Twitter or an email and just say that like you're like to learn about how they made their career path. And people are usually happy to talk about that.
Mm-hmm. What would you say to your younger self sitting in like J100 or maybe about to graduate in 2009? What do you know now that you didn't know then?
Well, I guess it would be to think bigger. I mean, I wasn't even thinking initially about applying for anything in New York. Like when I was a freshman and sophomore, I was like, I just wanted to like get to the Oregonian was like sort of my goal. And then somebody was like, oh, hey, the New York Times application is coming up. Like we got to get it in our applications for that. And I was like, wait, really? Like I wasn't even thinking about applying to the New York Times. Like, why not? Like, maybe I should, obviously I didn't ever wind up at the New York Times, but like, don't sell yourself short. And, everybody is sort of like making their way as they go, I mean, like everybody has to start somewhere, and and people are willing to give people opportunities, I think. Mm-hmm. So you don't have to have everything sort of figured out before you arrive, because you never really will have everything figured out,
Yeah. I want to bring in Jack Forrest, who was a co-editor of OR magazine this year and also works with the Emerald. Jack, say hello, and I know he has some questions for you.
Yeah. Hey, how's it going?
Yeah, how's it going? I guess my first question, we just came off of the Daily Emerald plug. So how do you think that working, for a student publication in college kind of helped you on your path, to being where you are?
Well, I think it was really everything, honestly, because that was where all of the stories, like, nobody's going to give you a chance unless you have clips. And the place that you can get your best clips as a college student, I think, is at the college paper, because the college paper, if you come in with like big ideas and big ambition to do a story, like they'll publish it because they're hungry for that sort of stuff. Like it might be harder to get things like that published in other publications. And so like, it's a place where you can really sort of like do what, you can just follow your curiosity, and you have the opportunity to write stories. And that's the thing that's going to get you jobs, I think, is the clips that you have. And the best place to get those clips is at the college paper. Like people have never asked me about class or grades or what projects I did in classes. Like it was like, what have you published,
Yeah. Yeah. And I guess my second question is, so you talked about kind of your rise up to the Wall Street Journal and having to kind of accept that you can do bigger things. How do you deal with sort of imposter syndrome? I mean, you're kind of now in a way the face of your publication sometimes, or voice. How do you deal with that feeling, or have you had to deal with that?
Oh yeah, it never really goes away. I mean, yeah, especially my last job. Before the podcast, I spent a year on the business side, sort of being managing our economic relationship between the tech companies and the paper. And that was definitely the most terrifying thing I've ever done in my career, because like I had no experience in the business world other than writing about businesses, and here I was like having to sort of like be the boss of two people and like interacting with senior executives. But I feel like I don't know, you just have to like ask questions and like, don't be afraid to say what you don't know. Like it can be very uncomfortable to be like, I don't know this. And you're sort of afraid that people are going to think you're stupid, but everybody has always felt that at some point in their lives. And I think that like people more often don't have patience for mistakes. And people have way more patience for asking something in advance and answering a question than they do for a mistake after the fact. A piece of advice that I got recently, which I thought was like really smart, and I've tried to apply this to my life, but is to manage people's expectations by like sort of telling them like what you can do, what you're prepared to do, or like if you're going to miss a deadline, be like, give someone an update. Okay, this deadline is not going to get met because of the following reasons. And so therefore there's no surprises. Like if people aren't really surprised, then it'll be fine and they'll be willing to sort of help you along. But you also have to put in the work too, and try to make sure that if there are things you don't know, how can you find the answer to those things? And how do you get smart on those things as you go along? Like when I started working at the Wall Street Journal, covering telecom companies, I hadn't covered businesses before either. And I was also just coming off of 3 years at Frontline, which was like long-term documentaries that the reporting was very different. I hadn't written an article. I mean, I almost went 3 years without writing an article. Mm-hmm. And so it was like, I had to retrain all these muscles, but like I bought a textbook called Show Me the Money, which was like, it's this really good textbook on like how to be a business reporter and like what kinds of documents to look for, what the annual meetings are, like just a total primer on what you need to know. And it's like, that was really helpful. And I also tried to like focus on like sort of 6-month intervals, or like, what is the thing that I'm not going to be able to improve on everything all at once. So like, okay, for the first 6 months in my job, I just want to like get my bearings. Like, I just want to understand the companies, build some sources, come up with some ideas, and I'm not going to worry about being a good writer. Like, I'm just going to like focus my energy on sort of the fundamentals. And then once I felt like I had my feet under me, I was like, okay, now I'm going to focus on like trying to write better leads. And like, that's the thing I'm kind of thinking about because you only have so many hours in a day. So if you can try to like focus your energy on certain things, and it wasn't super concrete. It wasn't like didn't set super hard goals, but they were just sort of like focus areas for a period of time. And once I started to feel more confident on each thing, then I would move on to the next.
Yeah. Yeah. And like you said, you've kind of had a diverse portfolio of stuff you've worked on, podcast, documentary, writing, business. how do you, what do you recommend to students to kind of be prepared for those changes? Like, how do you stay ready for anything kind of in a changing world?
Yeah. I mean, I think that like the most important skill is like the reporting skill of like asking questions, interpreting that information into and figuring out how to tell that as a story, because that's really the thing that underlies all the different mediums. I mean, a podcast is the same thing. Even on the business side, one of the things that really amazed me was how communication was the most important skill. Like there were people that had incredible expertise, but they couldn't communicate what it was that they needed, what it was that would make the world better. And so some of the times I spent just like trying to translate, like there was people that were really smart on SEO, for example, about like how to increase our traffic on Google or whatever, but nobody could understand what the hell they were talking about. And they'd file these memos that were just indecipherable. And so like just breaking that down and making people understand like what the message is that they need to take away from it was a skill that people found hugely valuable. And then people would start coming to me to be like, can you explain what's going on in this area? And so I think that is kind of the big thing, but also just like, if you're in college and like if you have an opportunity to dabble in anything, like you can take a class on working with audio or working with documentary, like definitely take those opportunities because it's just helpful to have like a broader skill set and there's more jobs that will become available to you. Like I had never done like the first time I did anything with audio was when I interned at OPB doing radio, and they sort of taught me like, okay, here's how you record and stuff. But once you understand sort of the fundamentals of reporting and writing basic story, then it really applies pretty quickly.
Yeah. And I'll go last question here. I always ask this. So what are you listening to right now? What are you reading? And do you have any good recommendations?
Yeah, well, my two favorite, I read The New Yorker and The Economist. I love The New Yorker because it's the deepest reporting that takes you like on a journey and opens your mind up. I read The Economist. It's very dry, but it's also a publication I feel like makes me actually smarter. Like, they're both very expensive though, but those are publications that I would recommend. I also listen to This American Life, Radiolab. Those are two of my favorite podcasts. I have a few other. I mean, I like Recode Decode is a podcast. Kara Swisher. They have a bunch of other recommendations if you're looking for podcast recommendations. One thing I would also recommend, there's a podcast that Gimlet put out called Gimlet Academy. It's on Spotify and it's in 8 episodes, but it's Alex Bloomberg basically talking about the Gimlet method or the Gimlet way or whatever. It's sort of like how you go from idea to podcast. Like it's storytelling, interviewing, editing, pitching. It's like the whole process that we go through at Gimlet and on our show. And so that's a really interesting thing to listen to. It's not technical in the sense of like, here's exactly what you need to do in your day job, but it's like more like ideas and like how to structure stories and stuff like that I found really, really helpful.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Ryan, and thanks, Jack. Really appreciate you taking the time out to talk with us today. And
yeah, happy to.